Very happy to be here. I'm originally from Ireland. I've been here August 9th. I will have been here 30 years in Los Angeles. So coming here as I did 30 years ago, sponsored by the Archdiocese of Los Angeles, it was a lonely place for me, coming from a small country to a big city. And I still am an immigrant here. So when you come to another country, what you try and do is you try and adapt. You try and fit in. You try and become one of the group. We are programmed to belong. So I tried to adapt. I started shopping at Lowe's, went to school at Mount St. since 2000, but pretty much the first year I came here, I said, I need to blend in. So let me start by going to school here. So I fell in love with the Lakers. I bought a gun. Oh, joking, I didn't do that. Didn't have that. But just looked for ways to blend in. Look for ways to blend in. And it's what we do. So what we'll be looking at today is, and as Father Chris says, you have your handout, you have the slides, and we will be looking at loneliness from a biopsychosocial perspective. We know what it is as a subjective feeling. So loneliness is primarily a feeling. It's a feeling that I do not belong, that sometimes I am forgotten but not gone. So we'll be looking at what we tell ourselves about loneliness. So has anyone here ever felt lonely? Raise your hand if you felt lonely. Absolutely. Like most things in life, that which affects us the most is that which we talk about the least. And we all know that you can be in a city of 8 million people and be surrounded with loneliness. So we know that it's a feeling as opposed to a fact. So there can be social isolation. I can be living in the middle of nowhere. I can be out living in the woods of Montana and feel lonely or not feel lonely. So there's social isolation and there's loneliness, and the two of them intersect. So let's see here. Okay, has everyone online you have access to? Yeah, it's okay. The PowerPoint is up and running. Great. So a great quote to understand how we are called to be by God is this quote from Saint Irenaeus. And for us as humans, we are programmed to find this in community. To jump right into the biopsychosocial approach here. So what we're going to do first is we're going to have a look at our brains. So I want you to go ahead and raise your fist like this, a closed fist in a non-threatening manner. Go ahead, just lift it up. Okay. So a closed fist is a good image for the brain. Back here where your thumb is, it's the old part of the brain. We call that the limbic system. So what do we call that? The limbic system, the old part of the brain. Out here, we have our frontal cortex. We call that sort of like the university of the brain, the neocortex and the frontal cortex. So what do we call these? The neocortex and the frontal cortex. In the middle of the brain, where your thumb is, there's something there that's very important, so we call it the amygdala. The amygdala is like a smoke detector. So all of the information that we're getting from all of our senses goes through the amygdala first. So where your thumb is in there, that's where the amygdala is. So as information goes into us, through our eyes, through all of the senses, runs through the amygdala first. And then it goes out, if the information is non-threatening, it's processed in through the limbic system, and then it eventually moves out into the frontal cortex. So it goes from the back to the front. So for example, if I were flying to my native Ireland, and I went to LAX and I said at the airport, I don't have a gun and I'm not going to attack the pilot. Now, I'd be telling the truth, but what would they hear at the airport? Gun, an attack, absolutely. So the amygdala is always scanning for dangerous words. The amygdala doesn't do grammar. So even though I'm saying I don't have a gun and I'm not going to attack the pilot, the amygdala hears gun and attack. So what happens then is the amygdala gets inflamed. So close your fists here again, okay? So what happens is the amygdala gets inflamed, and all of a sudden the limbic system gets inflamed, and it's the limbic system that's pretty much running the show. So the frontal cortex shuts down. So this is like a back alley in a bad part of town. This is like a university on the hill, like Mount St. Mary's up on the hill overlooking the city. And this happens in 27th of a second. So all of a sudden, I get inflamed. Similarly, if I say that at the airport, what's going to happen at the airport? If I say I don't have a gun, I don't have a bomb, I'm not going to attack the pilot, what are they going to do to me at the airport? Take me away. Absolutely. So the whole system gets inflamed and nobody is traveling anywhere. So what the amygdala does then, it shuts down an ability for advanced thought. It responds to threats. So the amygdala, basically a whole system happens with the amygdala triggers the pituitary gland to trigger the adrenal gland to start pumping. So we start becoming flooded with epinephrine, norepinephrine, and cortisol. So what are these three? Epinephrine, norepinephrine, and cortisol. So epinephrine gets my heart to start racing. Norepinephrine constricts my blood vessels to get me ready for a fight. And cortisol, which is produced in the medulla of the adrenal gland, pumps all over my body. So that happens how quickly? 1/27th of a second. And all of these last in the body for about up to 4 hours before they're metabolized out. So we are then in a state of hypervigilance, hyperarousal. We call that the sympathetic nervous system. So I'm getting ready for a battle, a real or an imaginary battle. So if I keep experiencing that over and over and over again, my body is flooded with epinephrine, norepinephrine, and cortisol, and we know how destructive they are, particularly cortisol. We know that cortisol calcifies in the intestines. Cortisol, it's like turning tissue. It's like when you dry a towel outside in the sunlight, in direct sun, you know how a towel becomes hardened in the sun? That's sort of what happens with cortisol. It's one of the most dangerous things that lingers in the body. So why are we looking at all of that? Well, if I'm telling myself, I am lonely, no one loves me, I am isolated, I don't have a community, the amygdala is constantly then inflamed. So I'm constantly ready for a battle. And it comes from the story many times I'm telling myself. So many times we have to watch our stories when it comes to isolation and loneliness. So this constant state of arousal will basically send us to an early grave. It causes inflammation as well, you can imagine. And it is so toxic to us. So that's why we see sometimes when we are very, very isolated, we do end up with chronic medical conditions. When we're not around people, we end up with chronic medical conditions. We call it amygdala hijacking. So the amygdala is constantly going and going and going, and the body never gets a chance to relax. So that's one of the key things that we'll be looking at. We'll be going into a little bit more detail as we go through. So that's the bio. The psychological part, the psychology would be my mind or my spirit, is the story basically I tell myself. It's my feelings about being lonely. It comes from so much of our thoughts comes from the narrative that we are telling ourselves. Let me give you an example. So if my story to myself is, I'm an immigrant far, far away from my motherland in this foreign country full of foreign people where no one understands me or gets me, that's story A. Story B is I love living here. I've been here for 30 years in this wonderful country. I love LA. It's a crazy city, but it's full of energy and full of opportunities and lots of dynamic experiences. And I am really excited to be here, and I will be here for the rest of my life. Story B. Now, there are two stories. One of them is going to trigger the amygdala, and one of them isn't. Which one is going to trigger the amygdala? The first one. So many times that first story, even though it is real, and it is how I am seeing myself, the story is extremely dangerous. So part of the work in psychotherapy is looking at the stories we're telling ourselves. We're looking at, now, is the story, we say, is it tutoring me or is it torturing me? So let's say that together. Is it tutoring me or is it torturing me? And so many times you're listening to people and you're listening to their stories and you're seeing in the story, it's like a minefield of inflammatory words. Now, the experiences could be real. We're not in any way dismissing the feelings, but we're looking at it from the story side of it. So many times when you're listening, you're helping the person to sort of change the story a little bit to a story that's going to give, to a story that's going to trigger, the parasympathetic nervous system. So we have the inflammatory system, we call it the sympathetic nervous system. So let's say that together, the sympathetic nervous system. The calming system is the parasympathetic nerves. Just think of paramedics. So, when the paramedics turn up, we all relax. Okay, always the professionals are here, they'll take care of everything. So sometimes our story of loneliness, sometimes in the psychological part of it, it can be the story. And that's where many times in chaplaincy and in psychotherapy, that's where we're helping the person with. Not denying their experiences or dismissing it, but maybe letting some light in and redirecting it a little bit. Okay. And the social. So what are we looking at? The bio, psycho, social. So we're looking at the social component. This is a component that only really has been looked at for the last 20 or 30 years. Before, we would always look at the bio, what's going on with the person's body in a medical way. Then psychology, what's going on with their mind. But in the last 30, 40 years, we've actually focused on the fact that people are human and people belong to communities and people come from families and we are beautifully interdependent. So what we look on now too is the social side of things. Who is in my village? Who is around me? The amygdala loves to be around people. We are programmed to be social. In fact, all of these horror movies that we have, these Armageddon style movies or zombie movies or end of time movies, these movies I'm talking about, like The Walking Dead, one of our greatest fears as humans is to be left alone, is to be isolated. You see these movies that, someone wakes up after some apocalypse and you're standing in your hometown saying, hey, I'm here in El Monte. Is there anyone out here? Or, how we're trying to connect. I'm here in the valley. Is there anyone over there? So we see that human need to connect. And one of the greatest fears for us is to be left alone. We learn from each other. We can see that the difference even being here and being on Zoom. In the days of COVID, we saw the difference of learning in a Zoom-like setting versus learning being present amongst people. When we're around people, we have what we call the observation effect. So let's say that together, the observation effect. So when we are around people, when we know people are looking at us, are going to look at us, we improve, we dress up, we take a shower, we shave, we clean ourselves up. Our behavior improves when we know we are going to be around people. Just think about it. If you've someone coming over to visit and they're coming at 5 o'clock, from 4 to 5, you're vacuuming, you're washing everything, you're cleaning the house up because you know people are coming. So one of the greatest things about being around people is that observation effect. So when we are being observed, production goes up on all levels. However, when we're isolated, the opposite happens. I know too, when I'm doing Zoom, I have the shirt and tie, and then I'm in shorts. I don't have these nice pants that I'm wearing or these nice shoes. It's just shirt and tie and shorts and flip-flops, you know? And so we know the importance of that. So isolation and loneliness causes a drop in standards, left, right, and center. Okay. One of the good things too, one thing that's important as well is that I don't need to know everybody. The brain, for the sympathetic nervous system to kick in, I don't need to know everyone. I just need to be around people. So for example, many people I'm working with, what I'm trying to get them to do is stop shopping online and maybe just walk into Target.
Recording in progress.
Okay. Maybe just to get them to walk into a store rather than do Postmates, just go there and talk to another human person. The problem is many times the more money we have, the more isolation we buy. I see that a lot too. And sometimes sometimes people who live in an apartment building and there are 30 or 40 other apartments around them, they are healthier than someone who has a lot of money and has a big lot and doesn't know their neighbors. So sometimes the more money we have, the more isolation we buy. So I'm in Encino and my office looks up onto the hills and you have these multi-million-dollar homes up there. People have a big home and a lot of land, but they're more likely to have mental health issues than in an apartment building where people are forced to interact with each other on the stairs, in the parking structure. So sometimes the more money we have, the more isolation we buy. We have our Prime accounts, we have our Netflix accounts, we then separate, and we disconnect. So many times, just even working with people, it's just getting them to walk around the store. Question?
So it makes total sense. It all makes total sense to me.
Perfect.
I'm wondering how the bio-psycho and social interface with somebody who's very strongly an introvert.
We'll be looking at that. Absolutely, we'll be looking at that. So, so once again, even with that, I don't need to know people. I don't need to talk. I don't need to know all of you here today. I just need to be around you. So even for introverts for many times, as you know, many times the introverted person enjoys being on their own. They need to recharge the batteries, but also the introvert would just need the social exposure. So remember, it's not about me talking to 100 people, getting 100 phone numbers, calling. It's just about me being around people. Also too, it's going to be the story I tell myself. So maybe at a certain point in life, I am choosing to self-isolate. I am choosing to buy that little cabin in Montana, and I'm finding benefit in it. It's not threatening because my story is like a bee story. I bought this little cabin in Montana. I'm going to grow my own vegetables, make my own clothes. I'm happy. So if the story, even if it's for an introvert and isolated, if it's an uplifting story, then I have triggered in that parasympathetic nervous system. Does that all make sense? It's like many people actively choose it and they find benefit in it. It's not imposed by a lifestyle or by other factors that they have no control over. All right. Does all of this make sense so far? All right, perfect. So, okay. So we looked a little bit at this brain structure. We looked at system, which is the emotional part of the brain. This is where my feelings are. And this is where my facts dwell. So this part of the brain shuts down this part of the brain. So the limbic system is stronger than the frontal cortex. We looked at the endocrine system and we looked at inflammation. So if I'm constantly flooded with epinephrine, norepinephrine, and cortisol, understandably, I'm going to be inflamed, and that leads to chronic disease. Okay. Health consequences, we've looked a little bit at that here. What we see too is depression, a lot of depression and anxiety. So one way to understand depression is understimulation. Yeah, so higher levels of sympathetic inflammation. So remember we said we have the sympathetic nervous system, and that gets activated how quickly? 1/27th of a second. So if I'm constantly inflamed, if I'm constantly telling myself that story, there's a danger, there's a danger, there's a danger, I will live in that constant state of sympathetic inflammation. So basically what starts happening is that is what we call the hijacking of the amygdala hijacking. So the body doesn't get a chance to go into that rest and relaxation. Does that make sense? So I'm constantly then inflamed. Remember we said we have, what are the three hormones? Epinephrine, norepinephrine, and cortisol. They linger for up to 4 hours, but if I'm constantly telling myself the same story over and over and over again, I do not get a chance to relax. So I'm constantly inflamed. So that's the sympathetic nervous system that doesn't get a chance for the parasympathetic nervous system to kick in. All right. Okay. Any other questions about that so far?
When you say inflame, you mean also physically inflammation?
Absolutely, yes. Physical inflammation. Absolutely. That's a very good question. Is there a certain amount of time that we have to be in community? We physically don't even have to be in community. Being around people is beneficial. I don't even have to know them. So I could be in another city. I could be in New York on the underground, and I could feel I'm around people. I could be at a concert on my own and feel like I'm around people. So I don't need to know people. I just need to be around people. But what we do notice is the minute I feel, so if I go to a Laker game on my own and everyone is wearing the Laker outfit, I feel, oh my gosh, we're all here together. We're all Lakers. We're all Laker supporters, you know? So then I feel absolutely connected. So it's pretty much automatic. If I feel I'm back in a tribe, if I feel I'm with my people, if I feel I'm with my group. So it is a feeling then that I feel, okay, I belong. So I don't have to know you. I just have to know you love the Lakers and we're going to a Laker game. That's why we love concerts. That's why we love concerts. And, you know, you look at the sports, you know, the Dodgers are playing. We all dress up in our Dodger gear. We feel connected. We feel connected with our community of faith. We feel connected with our alma maters. We don't need to know people. We just need to know that we belong, because we are programmed to be interdependent. We are programmed to belong. Okay, so we looked at the physical health. All right. We will be repeating some of this as we go through. So we looked at the sympathetic, parasympathetic. Yeah, so let's get back to depression and anxiety. So many times when I feel I'm lonely, what is a common feeling that happens to me when I tell myself I'm lonely? I feel I am depressed. So if I am understimulated, I am likely to be depressed. So depression, one of the strong aspects, the social aspects of depression, is that feeling of being disconnected and understimulated. Anxiety, we can often say, is overstimulation. So for example, how many here like Las Vegas, like going to Vegas? Yeah, I like going to Las Vegas, but 2 or 3 days are enough. So Las Vegas is overstimulating. It's on 24 hours a day. There are concerts, there are things can only keep that for a certain. Probably an hour is enough in Vegas, correct? Some of you could do 3 or 4 days in Vegas. Anyone here do 5 days in Vegas? No, I think we all agree that Vegas is overstimulation. So sometimes anxiety. I'm an immigrant here. No one loves me. I'm away from my country. I'm isolated and I'm abandoned here in this foreign land. Those statements alone will cause me to be anxious because they cause the sympathetic arousal. Does that all make sense? Now, the body can only maintain that for a certain period of time. So I will go from those negative statements from overstimulation, then to a period of understimulation. So I'm going to, as I'm telling you the story, I'm going to be anxious maybe for 3 or 4 hours. Then I'm going to need 3 or 4 hours of understimulation. Then I get back to baseline functioning. So what we often see with lonely people, an anxiety-provoking story that leads to depression because the story is anxiety-provoking. So we have baseline functioning. This is me just walking around. Then you say, Paul, how are you? You're an immigrant. How does that feel? Then I go into story number 1. Then that triggers anxiety. And then I can only keep pumping that for a certain length of time. So sometimes with people, also they are lonely. Loneliness can come from they're just doing the same thing over and over and over again. The brain loves new experiences. The brain is always saying the next tie is the best tie. The next car is the best car. The next meeting is the best meeting. So sometimes what we do in our lives is our lives become understimulating because so many times we can, if I'm not interacting with new people, if I am not going to new places, I will feel lonely. And that is because my brain is now understimulated. If I just go to Trader Joe's on a Friday and buy the same thing week after week after week, after a while that becomes understimulating. I'll end up telling myself I have a boring, dull life, and that will cause me to feel lonely and disconnected. So the brain is always looking for new things, new connections, new people, and new experiences. So sometimes we will see that there is a correlation between boredom, monotony, a lack of openness to change, a lack of openness to do things differently, to go to Trader Joe's on a Thursday or go in the morning, you will see that many times there's a strong social side to the loneliness, and that is the easiest thing to change. When we look at people, the biopsychosocial approach, the social is the first thing you can do to change them. That's why in a school, you're changing the students from one classroom to the next. You're moving them around the building constantly, so things are new all the time. All right. Yes.
It's another level, an adult with this history of an addiction.
Right.
Can the social events simply moving from the place, being at home isolated where they're practicing their intoxication, moving them out of the home?
Absolutely. Great question. What about someone with an addiction? We say the opposite to addiction is connection. So let's say that together. The opposite to addiction is connection. One more time. The opposite to addiction is connection. So many times what tragically happens with addiction many times is I'm trying to connect with people, so then I end up doing something that disconnects me. We call it submarining. I sort of go underground. I start smoking, I start drinking, I start using prescription drugs. I'm trying to connect with you, but the actions force me to go underground. And that is why, what is one of the greatest programs we have out there? We have Alcoholics Anonymous. 12-step programs are so successful because they bring people out of the shadows. People come out of the submarines and they start sitting around people. There's a concept in 12-step programs, they call it terminal uniqueness. Part of the problem in 12-step programs, if I'm an alcoholic, I think I'm the only alcoholic in the world. No one has ever done what I have done. No one has ever made the mistakes that I have made. So part of the problem with addiction is people will tell themselves a story that they are unique. And we call it terminal uniqueness. No one gets me. No one has ever done this. So then they'll go to a 12-step program and they'll hear, oh, I did that too. You know, someone will say, well, I drank 7 bottles of vodka on a Sunday morning. Someone else will say, so did I. And someone will say, I drank 8 bottles. So in other words, that terminal uniqueness is broken. And people then begin to say, oh my gosh, we're humans. We go through this. I'm not as unique and special as I am. And now I have a community that's mirroring back every crazy thing I have done while I was submarining. So you want to get people into 12-step programs. Any sort of thing. Most healing happens in the community because then you have a partnership. You know, you're listening to others. And I have some people that, you know, I'm very privileged to work with a lot of people in 12-step programs. Many will fight, you know, they will fight. They don't want to go to meetings. They want to stay lonely. They want to stay lonely and isolated. A great line is go to meetings until you want to go to meetings. Let's say that together. Go to meetings until you want to go to meetings. So sometimes the lonely person doesn't want to connect. They go, they're not my people. They're from the other side of the street. They're richer, they're poorer, they're taller, they're shorter. There's this resistance to change. So we keep saying, go to meetings until you want to go to meetings. Yeah, the 12-step program is one of the greatest programs. It's a great contribution that the US has made to mental health, that healing happens in the community. Once again, it's moving from the bio-psycho into the social movement.
About the connection. I was thinking, what about the connect self?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what often happens in the 12-step programs, I begin to hear other people talking about their own demons and their own monsters, and then I begin to identify my own. So when I hear others, I go, oh my gosh, I do that too. Others become like a mirror for me. So when we're in a group of people, we start learning about ourselves in community. Because insight is very slow for us to happen. Like I only know that I'm an Irish person because I'm living here. When I go back to Ireland, my Irish identity, I'm surrounded by them. So that sort of isn't, you know, they all sound like me and look like me. So I don't know much about myself if I'm stuck surrounded by dull Irish people, you know. But when I come here, then I learn more about myself because, you know, I'm hanging out with my friends from El Salvador, from all over the world, then I can see. So we learn through comparison. Now, one of the dangers, and we often see this with loneliness, is we go to another extreme, we call it compare and despair. Compare and despair. You know, we talk about social media. You're looking at your friends on Facebook and they all have a bigger, more glamorous, beautiful life than you have. You know how they're all taking these exotic trips with their beautiful kids in a beautiful car. So very quickly, we can see that we go into compare and despair. So a lot of the loneliness is coming from our over-reliance on social media. You look at your friends on Facebook, you feel fat, lazy, poor, old, you know, and they have this big, glamorous, curated life. So then I go, oh my gosh, those people are beautiful and rich and glamorous. Then I don't want to join them. And then I further isolate myself. So what do we call it? Compare and despair. So the more time we spend online, the more likely that story, that psycho story, psychological story, the middle section there, starts coming in that they have it all sorted out and I'm a hot mess. Another development from that is we call it comparanoia. Comparanoia. I'm comparing and I'm becoming paranoid. My friends are all at, they're all at the Cheesecake. They all went to the Cheesecake Factory on Monday, celebrating it. I wasn't invited. What's wrong with me? Why didn't they invite me? So then I become paranoid and I become anxious. So we are seeing a very strong connection with the self-imposed loneliness through social media. I'm comparing and despairing. Wow, all the beautiful people are at the Cheesecake Factory and I'm at home, with some heating up a pizza from Trader Joe's and they're at the Cheesecake Factory. And then why didn't they invite me? So that causes a lot of anxiety-provoking questions. And then that leads to that further sense of isolation. It leads to the story of isolation. We are built for community. Yes, we are social beings. In fact, the minute we are born, we have this reflex. As you know, babies are beautifully designed. We're born with the smile, the social smile. So one thing, even with a baby, you pick up a newborn baby, the baby smiles at you. How do you feel when a baby smiles at you? Absolutely, you feel special. So so babies smile, not because they're necessarily happy or they're enjoying my jokes. They smile because that natural thing pulls people in. So if a baby is smiling, I feel great. And now I want to take care of the baby and look after the baby. So we are programmed even physically with the social smile. In fact, many times lonely people do not smile. Lonely people do not smile. The brain is always looking at two things. When you meet a person, the brain is scanning the face and scanning the hands. If the brain cannot read the facial expressions, it goes anxiety, it goes stranger danger. Whereas if you're smiling, you transmit safety. You transmit connection. So the smiling person is the safe person. So sometimes, even if you're feeling isolated and you smile, you've transmitted safety and people are likely to engage with you. Does that all make sense? So sometimes you're even encouraging someone, you're looking at them, no one likes me, I'm isolated, my family hate me. And you sort of get it, they're like a wet Monday, Nobody is being pulled in. So we are programmed to be social, even with so what do we call it? The social smile. Babies are born with it. We are pulled in. We're pulled towards people who smile. In advertising, they say smile and dial. Smile and dial. Anything from this table? Any reflections? This table over here, any reflections from?
Back to COVID.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Betsy's saying it brought her back to COVID. And absolutely, that isolation, that imposed isolation and fear. Remember the fear we had? So meeting, all of the healthy things suddenly became suspect. You know how the ads on TV were, hey, I'm your grandmother, but don't come home for Christmas because you could kill me. Remember even in the beginning, handshakes, hugs were now almost dangerous weapons. So even it took us a while to get used to shaking hands again and hugging again. So two things that meant connection beforehand suddenly became seen as, if I hug my grandmother, I could kill her. So it takes a while for that to go away. We have what we call the negativity bias. So let's say that again, that negativity bias. The brain remembers the negative above the positive. So still, even with COVID, many people are still a little bit concerned about going out and getting on airplane. I mean, COVID is still around, as we know, but many people, understandably just remember the bad cases and whatnot. So it takes a long time to get over that. So the brain remembers the negative experiences. Think of the brain, it's like a filing cabinet. Just imagine this here as a filing cabinet. The top drawer, this is the top drawer, this is the bottom drawer. So so let me use another example. What's your first name? Charity. So Charity says to me, Paul, your shirt is ugly. That goes in the top drawer. Charity says to me, your tie is beautiful. That goes in the bottom drawer. So the brain always remembers the negative. So if I have a bad experience, it goes up here, not because I'm a negative person, but now it's a threat. So negativity and protectionism are quite similar. So sometimes lonely people are sort of stuck in the top drawer. I went to Trader Joe's, they were mean to me that one time, or I did this and people were unkind to me. So now I'm just staying in the top drawer. You think about it yourself. Your friend remembers your birthday, for the last 20 years, they forget it last year, and we focus on that. So the negativity bias gets us to tell a story of danger about ourselves. The brain remembers the negative. In fact, we know that we need to up to 30 good experiences. So I would need Charity to compliment my shirt probably 30 times to reduce the impact of the one statement. So up to 30 times to replace it in the filing cabinet of my brain. Memories are stored in the hippocampus. One of the many functions of the hippocampus is the storage of memories. So just think of it simply as sometimes people are living out of that top drawer. Even by explaining to them the concept of the negativity bias, you can universalize it a little bit. And that's the thing in community, we universalize our experiences. Okay, anything else from our group here this morning? Any reflections? Absolutely. Sports, the World Cup, the Olympic Games, because we're always looking for what we have in common. We are programmed. Ever since the caves, we've been interdependent. Someone would go out and kill the animal, someone would skin the animal, someone would cook the animal, someone would make clothes from the animal. So we are interdependent. Ever since the Industrial Revolution, however, and ever since we went from farms into factories, we've started celebrating the independence of people. This happened particularly in industrial cities in Europe, in that we moved from valuing the community to valuing the production. So as the industrial movement became bigger and bigger and bigger, and we went into cities, I became a human doing, not a human being. And we moved into this, even asking when we meet someone, what is your job? What's your job? As opposed to who are you? And you'll see that in many cultures, the first thing I want to know, what do you produce? As to who are you? That's why many times when people retire or people can't work for one reason or another, they absolutely feel disconnected in a Western culture that values production. I remember when I moved here to the States first, everyone would say, I'm busy, busy, busy. I wasn't busy. I almost had to hide because it was a glorification. I'm busy, 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 and busy. Aren't I great? And I was thinking, you're nuts. You're so busy, But we glorify the self-made man or self-made woman, who just goes off and builds a kingdom on their own. We put them on the front of magazines. But many times, so we have, in our Western world, we have a culture that glorifies busyness over being. So many times people are lonely because they're not producing anymore. I'm a former teacher, or I'm a former nurse. And so therefore I'm not. So since the Industrial Revolution, we have that mindset. And that can cause loneliness because I can't work for these reasons, therefore I'm not valuable. In our the first phase of life, we say the focus is in, first, I am programmed to be successful. I want to build my kingdom. I want to build my castle on the hill. Then in the second phase of life, I move from being successful into being significant. So firstly, I want to build my castle on the hill and, you know, have big lakes and horses and swans and all of that. Then as I move into my 40s, 50s, and 60s, it becomes who's at my kitchen table. Not how big is the castle, but who's going to come around, who's going to hang out with me on Friday night? Who remembers my birthday? So many times we're talking to people and they have built, and they're still building the castles. They're in their 80s. They're still focused on success, but not on significance. And then loneliness comes and saying, yeah, I'm 80, I have a castle, and there's no one in it. Does that make sense? And many times you'll see it working with people. There's that feeling that no one would really care because I have spent my time being successful and not being significant. It's good to use those words with people as well, because it sort of conceptualizes why they might be feeling a little bit lonely, or normalizing it and say, well, maybe you're looking into this phase of life now, you're looking to be significant. And that's where you come up with volunteering and all of these great ideas that you all know. Another way to look at it as well is in my early life, it's like, who am I as I build my kingdom? And then we move into whose am I? So let's say that together. Who am I to whose am I? And that many times makes us very lonely. I know I have a perfect LinkedIn profile. That's who I am. But then whose am I? Maybe I'm on my own at the weekends or whatnot. But on LinkedIn, I'm killing it, so to speak. So we move from successful into significance. We move from who am I into whose am I? So working with people, we normalize that, especially if we're working with people midlife or older, saying, no, this is a natural transition. It's not bad that you built your kingdom, so to speak. That's what we do when we're younger. That's what we do. We're programmed to do that. And then as we're older, even the frontal cortex here, we're asking more advanced questions. Community becomes more important many times when we are older. We're into that phase of who's around my kitchen table, not look at this great castle I have built.
Based on what you're saying, if we were to consider the Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yes.
The more you go up, the more lonely you become.
That's a great question. You're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Charity's question, absolutely. And you know, the ultimate need there being self-actualization, it can lead to loneliness. But if my feeling is even being self-actualized, if I'm feeling that this is good, even if I'm on my own in my castle, but I'm feeling I have lived a good life and I am significant and my castle will be used by many, many people and that all is good, then the loneliness doesn't necessarily happen. Remember, I can be on my own and I can say I'm too blessed to be stressed. Let's say that together. I am too blessed to be stressed. If I'm counting, and I could be on the 5th stage or I could be on the 1st stage of Maslow's hierarchy, it's going to be the story I'm telling myself once again. I'm stressed and not blessed, lonely. I'm too blessed to be stressed, peace and contentment. When we are counting our blessings, we actually trigger in the parasympathetic nervous system, especially at night and first thing in the morning. So if I'm here saying, I am so blessed to be in LA, to work at Mount St. Mary's, to be able to work with people all over the state of California, to have friends from all over the world, to belong to a great community and a wonderful city, and to live in the beautiful San Fernando Valley, if I'm saying that to myself over and over and over again, the sympathetic nervous system kicks in. In fact, there's part of your brain, put your finger over your left eyelid, now your own left eyelid, yeah, your own left, and your right eyelid. That's where your orbital frontal cortex is. That's the most advanced part of the brain. Starts growing when you hit puberty and continues to about age 25, 26, 27, 28. That part of the brain is the part of the brain that can take on advanced concepts such as loneliness, compassion, forgiveness, faith, justice. So as we move into our teenage years and era, that's why teenagers are wonderful, because for the first time, they're always fighting for, they can understand injustices for the first time. And they're out there fighting and protesting. That's why so many young people are out saving the earth, because for the first time, the orbital frontal cortex has started to grow. And that's where we have those most advanced thoughts. So when I am thanking and when I am grateful and when I'm in prayer, if you were to do a functional MRI on me, that part of the brain would light up like a Christmas tree or like fireworks on the 4th of July. There would be so much electricity there, and that then triggers the parasympathetic nervous system. So it's the attitude of gratitude. We know that when we are, no matter what we are, I could be the poorest person in the world, and I could be isolated, but I am grateful for everything I have, then that loneliness dissipates because of the story I'm telling myself. And that's where spiritually, when we come in with self-compassion, gratitude, forgiveness, we see that major shift. So I'm too blessed to be stressed, too blessed to be stressed. Okay. Any other questions, folks? Yes.
We were talking about before about the 2 stages. With stage 1 with the building phase.
Yes.
Building the castle.
Yes.
How much of that is cultural? Because I was just thinking of like the Eastern difference versus Western, where they have generations living together.
Absolutely.
And like throughout the family. And of course, everyone has the need to belong, security, the first level on the hierarchy, but how much of that is Western?
A great question. So that's sort of building my own castle. How much of that is a Western thing? Absolutely. What we see predominantly in the West is more so a celebration of individualism. You've done it yourself. You can do it. Go there. Whereas in many, many other cultures, it's collective. We do things for the family. We do things for the village. We do, so it's not about me building my own kingdom. It's about my family building the kingdom, so to speak. So there is a very strong cultural component to that. And this is, remember, very related to industrialization, that to build the kingdom, I had to leave the family. In fact, what often happens with education, so many times you'll have an interdependent community, but the kids have to go to school and they go off to another city or another country, and they leave the interdependent communities and sort of become westernized in a sense, because they get educated out of the interdependence, that beautiful interdependence that's there. So, and also too, we look in a suspicious way. We have this concept that gets thrown around of codependency. That what's wrong with you? You're always calling your mother, or you're interacting with your sisters all the time. You're codependent, so it's sort of a very Western idea, because when I came here first, I think, my gosh, the whole country of Ireland, that we are codependent, because we are sort of an interdependent community. We do value tribal thoughts, and so we even demonize it. We look poorly on kids who at 18 can't cross the country and start university on their own, for the first time. So we do think we pre-launch people many times from collective settings into isolation.
I think that would be better for the whole community to have supported and scout
Exactly. That's why even many times kids who will stay here and go to community college or just go locally can many times do much better than if they're suddenly crossing the country. They have lived a sheltered existence here, and now we send them off to Indiana or somewhere, hoping that they're ready to be launched, but they miss that interconnection. I work a lot, even professionally, with kids, with young, students who have, they've left the interdependence of their community, and they've gone to another part of the state or another state, and they cannot survive. They become very anxious. Their story is, what's wrong with me? Then they're medicated, and coming home feels like a failure. I'm working with one young gentleman, and he's moved back and he's going to go to a local school, much, much happier. But we're rebranding it as, no, you love your family. You have a good family. This is a you are beautifully connected as opposed to toxically codependent. So we are, we look at what people look, we see what's the local fashion and we follow it, what are people using? We follow it. We are interdependent. We can certainly look at that, because once again, it's that feeling, what I'm doing this to another person for some reason, but yet I see the person's humanity. And anytime in trauma or in abuse, when we other the person, when I say that person is an infidel or whatever we want to call them, or that person is they're bad, I'm the saint and they're the sinners. Every time we do that and we break that human connection, part of that experience is the breaking of a bond, and that results in trauma. We're academically doing it, but we know deep down that it's wrong. So we get pulled into it. So much of that comes from, these are other people. When I move into that reflective phase and I move out of that fight, when I move into the reflective phase as opposed to the reactive phase, then I start reflecting on what I have done. And many times it's upon the reflection, the trauma comes.
Thank you. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and today what we are now looking into, those of us studying moral injury.
Absolutely.
Reflexive view of what has been done.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So this part of my brain reflects. Remember, we call this, what is it, begins with the letter L? Limbic system. So here I here I react, and here I reflect. So someone attacks me and I automatically attack them because I'm programmed to. It's that fight or flight. And then later on, I go, oh my gosh, so once I get to a safe place, I go, what just happened? And then I go, why and who and what did I do to that person? And, I go from thinking that person gave me a hard time to that person is having a hard time. I move from depersonalizing what has happened into reflecting. And the danger is, once I see this other person as a child of God, someone's son, someone's daughter, then the trauma starts coming. So it's upon reflection. And that normally happens when I am safe. In the middle of the trauma, that doesn't happen because I'm firing here. When we're traumatized, blood actually leaves the frontal cortex. Blood leaves the frontal cortex and it goes into my fight muscles or my flight muscles. Oxygenated blood. That's why if we're giving someone bad news, we tell them to sit down. Because all of a sudden, I'm now turned into Thor, strong, or into the Hulk, strong and dumb. I'm strong, but I'm not thinking. So many times, absolutely, with trauma, there's that feeling of loneliness when upon reflection, I see what I have done. Many times too, we call it, it's what do we call it? A complicated grief, because I can't tell anyone about it. If my granny dies, I can tell everyone about it. But if I've hurt someone, I'm then sort of forced into a silence and it becomes more complicated. And I feel isolated and lonely. Like, how would you treat someone, are you saying, with PTSD? Like, how would you re-engage them?
To dismantle
We call it systematic desensitization, that you slowly but surely reintroduce them to whatever the threat is.
Cognitive behavioral therapy.
Cognitive behavioral therapy certainly works with that. So if people are anxious about something, like for example, if I'm anxious about flying and let's say I have to go to Sacramento tomorrow and I say, hey, can you drive me there? And you drive me there. Now I feel good, but indirectly I've told myself that flying is bad because I've avoided it. So the only way I can go from my trauma to flying is to actually get back on the plane. So maybe day one, I visit Burbank. Day two, I visit Burbank Airport. I have lunch there. Day three, I talk to the ground staff. And then maybe day four, I actually get on the plane. So one of the best ways with PTSD is the reintroducing, but controlled. So we have, the only way of getting rid of it is re-experiencing it, because if I avoid it, I feel good, but I've actually created a bigger monster. So if I never fly again, I go, you see, I was right. I feel good driving. That means that flying is dangerous. So it's counterintuitive. So PTSD, all of that can certainly, then I can be lonely saying, what's wrong with me? I can't fly. Then I feel, okay, I'm some odd person who can't fly. So sometimes PTSD, the story that becomes is that I'm very different. I am disconnected and nobody gets me. So that would be one of the fastest things. And cognitive behavioral therapy, exposure therapy, controlled, working with someone, with a guide on the side. We always talk about the guide on the side. That's a great question. So if someone goes to like 12 steps, which is a spiritual program, many times people will have a problem with the spiritual side of it, but they'll overcome it. So in the 12-step program, your God could be human nature. It could be the kindness of people. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, a God in any of the major faith traditions. But what seems to be the biggest thing is the community. So the community becomes the God, the kindness of others, the availability of others, rather than the particular faith of a particular tradition. And often many people too, they won't, that's also part of the resistance in getting help. No, AA is a spiritual program, I'm not spiritual. That can be part of the resistance. That can be just part of the alcoholism, for example. It can be another reason to not go. But what do we say? Go to meetings until you want to go to meetings. So with loneliness, you have to factor in resistance. Another thing too, we need to look at, how are we doing for time, folks? We have, okay, we're good, yeah. So another thing we have to look at is what we call secondary gain. So what do we call it? Secondary gain. So if I'm telling you that I'm a poor Irish immigrant away from the motherland and my people in this foreign land, and you're buying me a cup of coffee, I go, oh yeah. So I tell you, share that. Okay, share buys me a cup of coffee. Then John, I go and I tell John the same story, and John buys me a cup of coffee. I'm a poor Irish immigrant all the way from the motherland, far away from my people. And then I tell David the same story, and cha-ching, I get another cup of coffee. You see what I'm saying? So secondary gain is I might want to keep the story alive, the lonely story alive, and I don't want to do anything about it because I'm getting tea and sympathy. So sometimes you will see resistance to change in people, and they're telling you the same story, but they're resistant many times means there is a benefit. I'm happy to be sad. I'm happy to be sad. And then I tell Nick, and Nick gives me a cup of coffee and a bagel. So my reward system back here, the nucleus accumbens in the brain, gets activated. Every time I tell the story, cha-ching, I get tea and sympathy. I'm getting bagels, cookies, maybe an ice cream here and there. So we always have to watch. When people are resistant, many times it doesn't necessarily mean a trauma. It might mean the story has a benefit and they may not even be aware of it. So the reward system, the nucleus that comments the basal ganglia, which is back here in the brain, gets activated very quickly. So many times there might be a benefit to me staying lonely if I don't want to change. So what's important is that we are the resources, we're not the rescuers. In ministry, we are a resource, we're not a rescuer. We say, hey, here are 6 things you can do, as opposed to trying to rescue the person. Our role is to inform people, hey, these are things, not convince people. So what do? We inform, we don't convince. So we say, hey, you're experiencing loneliness. What about this? What about that? So sometimes in ministry, we want to rescue. We want to rescue, or we try to convince, but then we become part of the problem. So there is resistance, and many times people are just happy. There's a benefit. There must be a benefit if people are staying in a mess. And they have the right to do that. So it's just saying, okay, I'm responsible to you. I'm not responsible for you. Many times in ministry, we take on responsibility for the people and we start getting into trouble. So I'm responsible to you. I'm not responsible for you. So we'll do 5 more minutes and then we'll take our break. How does that sound? Okay, perfect. So just getting back to loneliness, aging population, many people living on their own, or sometimes you have people who can't afford, they have a home, the kids are all gone, but they can't afford to sell the home because they can't buy another home. They might have a 3-bedroom house, the kids are all gone, but it doesn't make financial sense to sell the home because, they're going to be hit with capital gains tax. So sometimes we have that. Also, we have the new phenomena now of smaller homes, of studio apartments, 1-bedroom apartments. That's causing more and more isolation because there are more and more people living alone. So we see that even in many new apartment buildings. There are fewer and fewer 3-bedroom apartments, more 2-bedroom apartments, but more 1-bedroom or studio apartments. So you can have more people living together, but living together in isolated cells. We call that urban monks. Urban monks. M-O-N-K-S. So I'm living in a small studio apartment, isolated, and everyone else on my floor is living in a small studio apartment. And that's sort of the way that we see a lot of buildings being built, that we don't see much communal space. Technology, as we know, the dangers of all of my friends live in my phone. One of the funny things with this is that if I'm talking to Father Chris and I'm having a good conversation, my dopamine, which is the reward hormone, goes up 30%. So we're having a great chat. The dopamine goes up 30%. We're talking about everything and anything. Suddenly, I get a text message from my friend Frank. Dopamine goes up 80%. So now automatically it's, sorry, I have to take this. So suddenly the brain is excited about this could be very important. Because Father Chris and I were having a chat, the brain can predict how the chat's going to be. But all of a sudden, we call it the magic of maybe. What do we call it? The magic of maybe. Maybe this is my friend Frank, and they're all going to the Cheesecake Factory on Monday. They want to invite me because I'm such this great, So now all of a sudden, I'm likely to go, okay, goodbye, Father Chris, and off I go with my phone. It becomes like the slot machine in my hand. We call it, it's the promise, not the product. Let's say that together. It's the promise, not the product. So it's the promise that I'm going to be invited to the Cheesecake Factory. Doesn't mean I'm going to, but I disconnect and then I reconnect with my 100,000 friends that I've never seen. Does that make sense? And as we know, you put on a picture, everyone likes it. What happens to your dopamine? goes up. So this is faster. This is more rewarding than chatting to Father Chris. So this is more addicting than having a great chat with this wonderful gentleman here. And it activates the reward system, which is back here in the primitive part of the brain. So dopamine, I'm promised way more by checking out my Instagram and whatnot than I am having a good conversation. In fact, when I think of going out with people I know, with Father Chris, then my brain is anticipating dullness, not because of Father Chris, but because it can imagine the exchange. Does that make sense? Whereas the brain goes into the magic of maybe. Maybe this and maybe that. It's like going to Vegas. Maybe I'll hit it, buying the lottery ticket. The brain loves the magic of maybe. And that's the basis of so many addictions. Getting back to addiction again, to the addicted brain, maybe this time I'll win the lottery, or maybe this time. So that's why we often see with younger people finding it hard to date now, because they're swiping left and they're on one date with one person and they have 4 lined up. You know, because, okay, I'm dating this nice girl, now I'm going to have coffee, but then I have 4 more lined up for later on. So I can't be present because the brain is saying maybe the next one is the best one. So let's say that together. The next one is the best one. The next one is the best one. So loneliness often comes from I can't appreciate what I have because the brain is promising me something better. The next talk is the best talk. The next vacation is the best vacation. So I'm on vacation in one place already thinking of the next one. So it's that relentlessness that I can't sit and have a cup of coffee with Father Chris and listen to his wisdom. So loneliness, then I become dissatisfied, and the more friends I have, in fact, then the more isolation I feel.
Development is an assessment of the skills I've lost, or when I even notice.
Great point.
They're
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
What part of our discussion addresses or will review the skills that are lost, or even a observation of the process of the communication that disappears when this does not happen?
absolutely. Like, when do I sort of become aware? Yeah, absolutely. When do I become aware that I've lost the skills myself? When do I become aware that the basic social, that the having a cup of coffee with Father Chris is actually much better than talking to my 400,000 friends online? Usually that's when loneliness can be my friend. Usually when loneliness can be the time to say, my gosh, I'm on my own and I have nothing to do. When I can move into that reflective phase, and, you know, and that's when I can go there, And many times people get there and many times people don't. But the experience of loneliness can be my friend. So when someone comes up to you and they say, I'm lonely, you go, great. Now we have a baseline. Let's connect you. Let's start from what is simple. Let's go back and start with what is easy. So many times that's why something bad and honesty is actually something. That's, once again, 12-step programs. People will come in and they say what their problems are, and people say, fantastic. Now we know what we're working with. Absolutely. The role of spirituality. Absolutely. 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 And as we know, once again, like when we go to church, we are surrounded by people. We identify with our denomination. We become proud of it. We become immersed in it. And absolutely, the gathering of people alone sets us up to have a deeper experience of God. Because, you know, we're there with the guide on this. We talk in spirituality, you know, there is sort of, it's like going to a conference. You have the sage on the stage, and then you have the guide on the side. You're with people who are going through the same who have the same faith, the same value system, the same principles, and that can be a great experience of connection. That's why many times as immigrants, the first thing we do is we find out where is our temple, our church in our new community. Traditionally, immigrants have sought out their places of worship as the beginning of the connection with the community. Absolutely. When we're praying again too, what part of the brain lights up? The orbital frontal cortex. So when we're gathered around people that have the same value system, worldview, we feel, okay, we are absolutely connected. It's like going to a concert in a way. It has that same feeling of connection, that we're all there, rooting for the Lakers. But then the beautiful thing of our faith is that we know we are there, that we see each other as God's creation, as brothers and sisters. So it can be a deeper connection. Absolutely. It can be the deeper journey, no matter what the faith tradition is. Absolutely.
I have a question.
Yes.
The phenomena right now about mega church.
Right.
It's people get in church without any knowing each other,
Sure.
but still
Mhm.
struggle with isolation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We can be a member of a massive church. We can be, and feel extremely isolated. At the end of the day, many times we just want people to know our names. That's why we're wearing name tags. And many times you'll have small churches that become massive churches and then start to fall apart because they become too big. So at the end of the day, we're community people. And if within those churches or organizations, there are smaller groups, like even here, we're not sitting in we're sitting in a circle that engenders sharing as opposed to sitting in a conference style. And I'm walking around with a mic, So what you do is, you take something big and you break something down smaller. One of the things in churches too is when we all sing together, we do feel connected. Like you'll have 100 voices and you don't hear them once the hymn starts. So it's a great way to bring down isolation. And one of the things, even going back to singing, with Nelson Mandela in Africa, he would have these massive rallies in South Africa. And also Archbishop Tutu would have these fantastic rallies in South Africa when they were fighting social injustice. But always with those, especially with Archbishop Tutu, he would have a hymn at the beginning of every rally. And because people would sing a hymn, they found out that there was no sort of craziness at the rally. Things didn't go wild and crazy, but that the hymns united people together. Does that all make sense? Where sometimes where there's a protest, many times side groups break off and start doing crazy antisocial thing. What they've noticed with Archbishop Tutu, the secret was, as they look at crowds, was the fact that as people were singing together, they felt united and they didn't feel other or different from other people. So singing in the mega churches, being together, can absolutely enhance the spiritual experience. On this group here, any comments, any reflections? Over here, anything to, okay. Oh, question on Zoom? Oh. All right. Let's have it.
Already looked at.
Oh, that question. Yes. Yes, there was a question. Thank you. And there might be another one as well. Okay. And so the statement is, because the brain values the new, I can also feel a greater sense of connection by connecting with others who don't share my convictions and values, such experiences expand my imagination. And that's from Timothy. And that is an absolutely wonderful point, that I can be, as an Irish person, I don't need to be with Irish people. So I can be with people from all over the world. And so people who are very different from me. And every time I learn something about a new culture, my dopamine takes a good hit. So education makes me feel connected. So if I'm hanging out with friends from Uruguay and they're telling me about Uruguay, now I have learned something new and I feel good. So education raises our self-esteem. So I may have nothing in common with people, but if I'm learning about them, my esteem goes up because that's what education does. So every time we learn something, we get a spike in our dopamine. Does that make sense? If I'm just hanging out with Irish people all the time, talking about Ireland, God forbid I would do that, things would become very dull and very understimulating. So remember, that's a very good point. We don't need to be with like-minded people. That can form a connection, but it can also be understimulating. I don't seek out Irish people in LA, you know? So that's a very good point. Does that make sense? So we don't have to be people. It can form a community, but it can also be limiting. So when we go outside and when we learn more, our esteem goes up and then our dopamine goes up. So now I have 4 friends from Uruguay and I know a lot about Uruguay. Now I feel connected with them. Information connects us. Information creates a type of intimacy. Information creates a type of intimacy. So I know about my friends from Uruguay. I know all about Uruguay. I've eaten food from Uruguay. I now feel connected. So that's a great way also. That's why many times we'll take a class or join a book club, because now we're all reading from the same book and we're sharing together. So education raises self-esteem. I learn something, I get a spike in dopamine. People do not need to be the same as me because that could be understimulating. Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's a very, very good point. All right. So let's continue on. Absolutely. Great question. So where do I go from the fear of Irish people to sort of saying, I don't want to learn anything more about them versus I am willing to give it a shot? Where is that sweet spot? That will be up to myself, really. You know, that's going to be my reflection. Am I willing and open? And many, many times it's just through exposure, isn't it? You know, it's just bias being put around. That's what can be like even a group like, you know, like any group, many times we wouldn't meet each other if it weren't for this. So sometimes throwing people into groups can be that sweet spot. In fact, there's a great movement and it started in Australia, that wonderful country. It's called the shed movement, like your garden shed. So, and it's spread all over the country. It's moving here into the States. You know, we have them all over Ireland, and it's a big, coming from Australia, it's in the UK, it's in Ireland, it's in New Zealand a lot. So basically these shed movements are, every sort of community would have a shed, which is literally a shed. And people go there, mostly men, most of the sheds are for men. So people will go there just to restore furniture, learn a skill. And in the sharing, in the restoring of a table, or the fixing of something, or fixing some electrical appliance, then in the task, the talk happens. So what we know, particularly with us men, the best way to get us connected is to give us a task. So one of the ways, and the shed movement is great, and it will continue to grow here. And sometimes there's sheds are sponsored by churches or temples, and they're places that will bring mostly retired men or isolated men together with a task. We guys, as men, we're not great at sharing our feelings or even knowing how we feel, but we will turn up. And once we start doing something, then the talk happens. So first you need to give us a task, and then we will talk. Let's say in a church setting that many times, if there's a school attached, you'll have mommy and me groups, women's prayer groups, women's book clubs, but you won't have that for guys. You won't have a daddy and me group or men wouldn't turn up. But if you need the classrooms painted on a Saturday, we guys are likely to turn up. We'll turn up to run the festival. We'll turn up to plant trees or something like that. So many times with men and with adolescent boys and young men in particular, a task gets us to talk. That's why we'll go to the driving range together. We play soccer together. So working with isolated men, the fastest way to get us to connect is give us a task. And then the task leads to talk. Women are much more gifted when it comes to talking. When women talk, they produce oxytocin, which is that cuddle hormone. Ladies, would you say that to be true, that women find it easier to talk to women? Socialization as well. Two women can talk to each other at Target, no problem. If I go and talk to a guy at Target about a shirt, they'll say, step away, who are you? You know? So part of it is the socialization, that it's okay. Also, too, we know with part of the brain, it's between the two lobes. Many scientists would say that the tissue between the two lobes that I can't think of now, the corpus callosum, is wider. There is a theory that it's wider in women than it is in men, so that the two lobes are firing more, that women will see things in a much broader way. That's a theory. It's hard to actually prove, but we would see it partly socialization as well. So basically, to get us to talk and break down the isolation, the shed movement is a great example of that. Getting us to volunteer. One of the resources I put up there is volunteermatch.com. So if you have nothing to do all week, you go on to Volunteer Match, you put in your zip code, and all of a sudden it say, hey, we're cleaning the beach at Malibu or something, or we need 100 people to do this, or we need volunteers to call others, So with the task, you're likely to get the talk. But for us men talking, it's not, we don't get that same level of oxytocin as women necessarily do, generally speaking. So the best way sometimes to break the isolation is a task. Meetup.com is a great resource as well. Many times a talk that involves movement. Movement. Movement is better for isolation first. You want to get the person out of walking and exercising, and then the talk happens. Does that all make sense? So we say move over mood. All right. As we said already, the opposite to addiction is connection. COVID and global warming show us how interdependent we are. So it brings us back to that sense that we all need each other. COVID showed us that there are no national boundaries when it comes to, there are no national borders. Global warming is the same. Children, one thing too we see with children is that children are look at the toys we give children. They're attracted to teddy bears and little puppies and cute toys. So children are attracted to empathetic people. So many times, if our empathy is low, we end up sort of being quite isolated. If we're not very compassionate and empathetic towards people, we will render ourselves quite unattractive. So sometimes you're working with someone and they're very rigid and frigid. They're very sort of black and white, and they're wondering why they're isolated. They're just this way or the highway. There's very little compassion and empathy for vulnerable people. And so that means then that we are not very much attracted towards them. So we see it with kids. We learn empathy by people being empathetic. So many times when you're working with someone, you can be the first one to be empathetic towards them in their loneliness or in their isolation or in their theories about people that have isolated themselves. That's why I have the guidelines here to enhance communication. So many times the isolation isn't because I'm living in the middle of Montana. The isolation is just because I'm not a nice person. I'm sort of mean. I'm odd. You know, I'm very opinionated. I am rough and gruff. I don't have good social skills. Many times people you work with, they're just nasty. They're just not nice people. That's hardness of heart, and they're getting rewarded for it. So many times they come and, you know, you're working with them and you're saying, my God, you speak to your wife like that? You know, you talk to your kids like that? And you wonder why they don't call you, you know, so to speak, you know? So many times what you're doing is you're actually giving people tools and techniques. And that's why I have 50 of them here. Like number 29, connect, don't correct. Join, don't judge. So many times I might say, well, I don't like people from Paraguay. They're all mean people, you know? Therefore, I'm going to be isolated and possibly lonely rather than me joining before I judge. Focusing on connecting, looking at my anger and lack of forgiveness. And that's where spiritually we can so help when we're helping people move towards forgiveness and compassion, because all of our faith traditions talk about and highlight forgiveness, compassion, and understanding. Like number 38, he who angers me controls me. Many times I am angry at someone and then I isolate from them and I isolate from the village. And then I put myself in a self-imposed isolation. I want to highlight number 46. Okay.
For the people at home, could you identify what, as they're seeing the screen?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. So we're on the handout. Thank you, Father. We're on the handout called Guideline to Enhance Communications. It would be your second handout. And this handout is more so directed towards if I'm isolated from people, I might need to learn some new skills. So these are skills I've pulled from all over the place and put on this page. So there are 50 that I have on this page. And many times I'll just hand these out to people and say, what do you need? You know, what skills do you have already? And what skills maybe do you need to work on? So we're looking at number, you know, we were just looking there at number 38 on guidelines to enhance communication. Is sometimes I'm isolated because I'm angry. I'm not forgiving people. I'm telling myself I'm a victim of a situation. The world has been mean to me. People should have appreciated me more. So many times we help people sort of change the story and maybe bring in some new ideas, moving from being a victim to being a victor. So many times, once again, the loneliness is, you know, it's an expectation. A great line is an expectation is a premeditated resentment. An expectation is a premeditated resentment. So I go into the Irish community of LA, wherever that is, and I expect to be welcomed and celebrated. And then I go in and they don't even talk to me, so to speak. So now I'm resentful because I had a big expectation. So an expectation is let's say together, an expectation is a premeditated resentment. So many times you know, it's Christmas or it's one of the big holidays. I should be surrounded by people and I'm not. Then I'm resentful. And then I feel lonely and feel isolated because of my expectations. So this would be the psychological and the social part. So many times we look and we just try and incorporate new skills to bring us back into the community and, you know, just to give ourselves those soft skills. So the loneliness could be, I just expect things to be different and not realizing that the expectation is the problem. Rather than me thinking, okay, I'm going to an Irish event, let me see what I can do. Can I help? Can I be of service? Who needs me? Can I share my time, talent, and treasure? What do they need? Rather than what can they give me? So sometimes, even with you'll see it in families and loneliness, the parents are anticipating the kids the kids should want to be with them and call them all the time. The kids should want, sometimes parents will have those expectations. My daughter doesn't call me every day. I feel isolated. Maybe we change the expectation. Or my son doesn't call me, or the kids don't want to spend vacation time with us anymore. Does that make sense? So we just look at the expectation. So when you're looking at loneliness, you just sort of peel back and look at the story and the expectation. Absolutely. So Sherry's just said there that she was with her mom last night, and her mom says, I so look forward to your visit. And when you're with me, I love your visit. And then when you're gone, I'm reflecting on your visit. So as you can see, you have a wonderful mother who is very grateful. She's focusing on the gratefulness. She's seeing herself as a victor of having a great daughter rather than, why aren't you with me every day? She's not a victim. She's telling a different story. And when she says that, what are you likely to do? Keep going. We say rewarded behavior is always repeated. Let's say that together. Rewarded behavior is always repeated. So many times, if we are people of gratitude, like Sherry's mom, and say these things, we are likely to break the isolation. So I move from expecting community to actually creating community. One of the things too, and it's just Sherry, what your mom was saying too, the brain, if we know, I might feel lonely today, but if I'm meeting my friends on Friday for the Cheesecake Factory or something, the brain, the reward system gets activated. The brain can't distinguish between now and Friday. It just feels good automatically. So the brain can't do the future. It feels the future. Does that make sense? So a great way to bring about loneliness is to imagine, hey, you're meeting your friend in 2 months. Your daughter is coming to visit you on August 20th. As people focus on that, the reward system gets activated, the serotonin goes up and the dopamine goes up. So imagining or reflecting on times in the past when you were surrounded by people you love. So if you were, 10 years ago, you went on a nice trip or you had a nice experience with 10 good friends, and you're thinking about that, all of those good feelings come back again. That bottom drawer in the hippocampus opens up again, and I am reliving all of those good feelings. So that's why it's important to keep remembering and celebrating the good stuff. That reduces isolation. It's like when someone dies, we can just remember, say they're not with us anymore, but we can remember the good times and we feel like they're with us all over again. All right. So I think we're.
So they're kind of lost on the PowerPoint.
Oh, they're lost on the. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Sorry.
So those at home, just to let you know, if you didn't sign up with us and we didn't get your email, that's why you didn't get the PowerPoint and the attachments. So if you did not get any of that, if you could put in the chat your email, and then afterwards we'll make sure that we get those things sent to you just to respond to the questions there. And then they're also wanting to.
Absolutely. And sorry, I did go a little bit off the PowerPoint. Sorry about that. But you will be getting all of this. And I'm not sort of sticking to the PowerPoint, but everything I've said it's in there. So let's just get back to the PowerPoint again here. So we got into what can we do? What are tools and techniques? We've highlighted some of them. Any activity under the sun that, especially for men, that connects us is going to reduce the isolation. Physically being around things, volunteering, all of that good stuff. Something I want to draw your attention to that is working really, really well. And it's on your, so let's look at the resource page. Now I put some resources here, and these are LA based, but one in particular, when we look at the internet and technology, we're often sort of demonizing it a little bit. But I want to draw your attention to the resource page, which is the 4th page. And there's a new thing. The great thing, do you see the hotline and online resources? Okay, so just look at the bottom there. Look at number 3. Catholic Charities in, I think it's in Oklahoma, Catholic Charities invested heavily in this new AI bot called Hope. This new AI bot. So if you text that number, they were calling it Sister Hope, but then they said, well, let's drop sister because it might sound too Catholic and it might scare people. So they just call it Hope. So if you text this, you start interacting with a bot. And I get a message every day from Hope. And Hope will text me, say, Paul, how are you doing today? Do you ever feel lonely? Have you exercised today? Have you connected with friends today? So, and if I start talking with Hope, we have a nice chat, even though it's a bot. And it's used now by people all over the world, and it's made available for free by Catholic Charities. It's also supervised by social workers so that if anyone is in any way suicidal or anything like that, they know how to send local resources. But we are seeing more and more of that, and a lot of younger people are doing it. So you just text that number, and it's in English and it's in Spanish, and all of a sudden, Hope will text you right throughout the day. And if you're saying to Hope, I'm feeling a little bit down today, Hope will say, okay, Paul, well, have you walked? Have you had your shower? Have you brushed your teeth? Very, very, very practical. Now, particularly with young people who've been raised with texting, this does not feel like I'm interacting with a server in an industrial park in Oklahoma. It feels like I have someone there who cares. So we are seeing it that this is only going to grow more and more and more. It's like the guide on the side. And so you could, you see here, I have the link there, Talk to Hope. And it's probably one of the best ones out there already because it's free. And it's funded by Catholic Charities. So, and it's well run, well organized. And so I think there are about 10 million users already interacting with Hope. Yeah, so it went from Sister Hope. They said, nah, that doesn't market well, and just down to Hope. So more and more, we're going to see things like that. Now, to the brain, oh my gosh, it's Hope. Hi, and Hope is asking me if I've exercised. So it does, remember, it gives that feeling back here. In the limbic system goes, hey, it's a text from Hope. As opposed to, oh, hang on, it's actually a server, and there's no person. So the feeling is very, very, very good. And anyone can interact with it. As ministers, you can read up more about it. And if this is something you feel people would enjoy, it's good even just for yourselves, just to sign into it. And you can see how it is. So it's constant connection. It's constant connection. We mentioned up here at the top, we mentioned Meetup. So Hope understandably is going to keep me isolated. I'm never going to meet Hope. I'm never going to fly to Oklahoma and talk to the server. There's no person, but there is a sense of somebody's got my back and someone is a resource. And the good thing with Hope is that Hope will, encourage you, read a book, get outside, take a shower, drink some water, walk the dog, stuff like that. So Hope will give me resources and will not pathologize what I'm going through. They will join with me and not judge with me. And that's where in ministry, we can be very, very successful because you don't have to diagnose and come from a place, a medical place. You can put down the DSM, you don't have to use the DSM. You just meet the person where they're at. So you're joining and not judging. You're the guide on the side, which gives great freedom and to be the resource. Okay. So, so there's just, so these are local Jewish family services, fantastic organization. As we know, the YMCA, WCA, Asian Pacific Counseling, there's so many places that just offer free and individual or group access to many people. Many people will shy away from the resources, but they're more like, many people will go to, rather than go to anything that sounds mental health wise, they're more likely to go to volunteermatch.com. So you start with the outside and you work inwards. Okay, so we've looked at that. We've mentioned cognitive behavioral therapy on the slide. Cognitive behavioral therapy, basically cognition is a thought, and cogito, it's a thought. So if I change my thoughts, I change my behaviors. We call it FTA. My feelings become my thoughts, and my thoughts become my actions. So what do we call it? FTA. My feelings become my thoughts, and my thoughts become my actions. So if my feeling is I feel lonely and isolated, the thought is, well, I feel lonely means I am lonely, and then I don't connect with anyone, and that reinforces the feeling. So sometimes people get into, we call it the FTA loop. I feel abandoned. That morphs into a thought that I am abandoned, I have been abandoned, and then I don't connect with anyone, and that reinforces the loop. So many times cognitive behavioral therapy is trying to challenge that and break that. All right. Pastoral care, spiritual practices. I think we looked at this again. Once again, community, bringing people into a village, gathering people for spiritual practices. Building community is what our temples and churches do extremely well. At the intergenerational, we know that that's so important. Anything that gets the young people with the elderly together is the best thing ever. Sometimes, even with youth groups, we just put all of these peers together that they don't necessarily want to be. 15-year-olds don't necessarily want to be around 15-year-olds. Many times, the great thing about churches and temples is that you can have young people and old people and all ages working on a similar project together. That tends to break down isolation faster than putting people in peer groups. So sometimes you don't just want to put the 80-year-olds together, because then they'll feel, okay, we're different from the 70-year-olds, the 60-year-olds, the 50-year-olds. So you just put everyone who loves the Lakers, you throw them in together. You'll have 10-year-olds, 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds. Does that make sense? So sometimes in our therapeutic settings, we throw in people who shouldn't really be in together. We don't have a healthy mix. That's not reflective of society. All right. I love this one here. Saint Teresa of Avila. God save us from gloomy saints. God save us from gloomy saints. Sometimes our stories can be gloomy, and they can be reinforcing the gloom. And that in a way can isolate us even further. So going back to just always checking the narrative. All right. Okay, time-wise, we're doing great. Any questions or anything? Okay, so far so good.
Say something about, because it's some spiritual, or religions, we have solitude. Could you distinguish that between loneliness and solitude?
Absolutely. A wonderful question here from Charity. In faith traditions, we have sort of the active, and then we have the contemplative. So solitude, if solitude is a choice, I may not necessarily be lonely per se, because I am choosing a lifestyle. I am going into a Buddhist monastery, or I'm going into a Trappist monastery, and I am choosing to do this myself. And so if it's a choice, I am less likely to be lonely because it's a choice. And many times, even within monastic settings, there is some time for community. It may not even be talking together, but it might be working together. So many times monasteries in all traditions have some sort of communal activity or source of income. So I can be around others, but certainly, once again, it gets into the choice. So absolutely, if I might say I've worked hard and I don't want to talk to anyone for a month, I'm going to a cabin or a monastery. And if it's a choice, then I'm already seeing it as a benefit. Does that all make sense? And many times, you know, if I'm introverted, I will need more time than an extroverted person, but it's knowing what works for me. That's why you wouldn't want to put a very extroverted person in a monastery or a very introverted person in charge of, you know, a big community. You just have to find out what the person's strengths are. So remember, I can be with people, I can be on my own, but absolutely not feel lonely. I can be, as St. Francis would say, in the outdoor chapel. I can be surrounded by nature. I can be with animals and plants and feel like I am totally connected, and maybe there's no one for miles. It'll be my story. It'll be how I see it, okay? We mentioned some of so the mind, we have 90,000 thoughts a day. So many times we're going from thought to thought. So many times we're anxious or we're feeling disconnected because we are constantly thinking. Now, if those 90 thoughts are negative, you know, if those 90,000 thoughts, I'm on my own, I'm abandoned, no one cares for me, this is terrible, I've left my land, I will be a very, very anxious person. So we have these thoughts that are constantly fighting. We looked already at the negativity bias, egocentric thoughts. That's an egocentric thought is I am, it's like the terminal uniqueness. I am the only immigrant in the country feeling so isolated. Nobody has ever felt this. So an egocentric thought is I have isolated myself. I'm the only one going through it. Does that make sense? Nobody can ever understand me because I'm so unique and special. So many times when people are lonely, their story is very unique, but it's isolating. So when we're stressed out, we create a narrative of egocentrism that nobody can get me or nobody can understand me. Another example of an egocentric thought, if something bad has happened, so let's say if I spilled coffee on my shirt, I would think, now I'm feeling stressed, and I think everybody is looking at the stain and everybody is talking about it. So what would I do then if I have a shirt full of stains? I'm not going to turn up. So sometimes people create these egocentric stories about themselves that because of something, people are judging me. People are looking at me. We call it the spotlight effect too. People, you know, if people knew this about me, they wouldn't come near me or they would abandon me. They wouldn't want to be around me. So we go into that self-imposed isolation. So I think there's a big spot. So I have a big stain on my shirt and I think there's this big spotlight following me. So I have to move away because of the stain. So many times that disconnected part of ourselves, we put ourselves in that self-imposed isolation. So ministry and therapy is bringing people back, you know, basically saying everybody has a stain on their shirt. Everybody is carrying some sort of cross. Everybody's being weighed down by something. And once we start sharing that, then we move away from that feeling of self-imposed isolation. A great line is that which impacts us the most is that which we talk about the least, or that which affects us the most is that which we talk about the least. So many times we're sitting with people and struggling with our own demons, but we feel we can't talk to anyone about them. That's why in ministry, if you say, gosh, you know, I'm really lonely, if you are the first one to bring it up, then they're likely to connect with you. You become the wounded healer. Or you say, gosh, you know, I felt really lonely last week, or I went on vacation on my own and I was lonely. Then you're likely to get the conversation going. So many times we normalize it and then we start the conversation ourselves. Does that all make sense? So you might be the first one to say, wow, my kids have grown up, or, my granny just died and I feel very lonely. Then many times that will just give them permission to talk themselves. We looked at compare and despair. We looked at comparanoia. We looked at feelings, thoughts, and actions. We looked at, will I let this tutor me or torture me? One of the areas we're not great at is self-compassion. Compassio comes from the Latin, com is with, passio means suffering. So many times we might be very compassionate towards other people, but we're not very compassionate towards ourselves. So you will often see this with lonely people, that their story is, I was a bad husband, a bad wife, a bad alcoholic, a bad teacher, a bad driver. There's this lack of compassion towards themselves, and that then isolates them. So even for ourselves, the more compassion we have, the more we allow ourselves to be compassionate towards ourselves, the more likely we are to engage. So even modeling that for people we're working with, even if they see us model it, then they're more likely to join with us. Okay. Meditation, getting back to spiritual practice. I love this quote from St. Francis de Sales. Half an hour's meditation is essential, except when you're busy, then a full hour is needed. A full hour is needed. One of the great gifts in all spiritual traditions is that ability to be present and to reflect. Like we said before, it's many times, it's just, even with PTSD, it's when I have that ability to reflect and meditate, then I can very much connect myself with the world and with people who are going through the same thing. So let's look at some good spiritual practices to lessen loneliness. We spoke about prayer and community worship. Very, very good thing. Remember, we spoke about the need for exercise. When people go on pilgrimages, we see this in all faith traditions. When people are walking together with a common purpose, people connect. When we're walking and we're talking, and this is a great thing. Nature walks, very, very important as well. When we're out walking in nature, and there's this concept, and it was developed in Korea, and it's called nature walking, or forest bathing, and very, very good. And they're still studying it in Korea. But the idea is that I would walk in a forest with no shoes on, and I would connect with nature. And we know now that if I am in the presence of nature, and if I'm walking in nature, what starts happening in my brain is I start producing a protein called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF. BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So that protein elevates my mood for up to a week. So I might be depressed, I might be isolated, but if I go for a walk in nature and I'm exercising in nature, I am very likely to lessen the mood of anxiety and disconnectedness. I will come back with a better mood, and therefore I am more likely to talk to people. Another thing too, quickly, is that when we're in the presence of trees produce this chemical called phytoncides. Python, like the snake, CIDES, that also elevates our mood. It's a chemical produced by trees to prevent rotting and to prevent attacks by bugs. As we inhale it, our mood gets elevated as well. So walking and talking, and then being in the presence of nature, just ingesting the phytoncides from the trees. Absolutely. Well, from the walking, from the walking in the, it's called brain-derived neurotropic factor, BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic. What does that mean? It means it causes neurons to grow. So when you know yourself, if you go out for a walk and you're worried about something, you go out for a walk, you walk around the block for 30 minutes, all of a sudden you get more clarity. So neurons start to grow as we are exercising. So the BDNF is different from, it can happen while walking in the forest. It can also happen while walking around the block. Absolutely. It can also happen with virtual reality walks as well. It can also happen, you're sitting with YouTube, your big screen TV, and you're looking at a beautiful forest in upstate New York somewhere. You get the feeling of being there. So it's to do with the exercising. So it causes new neurons. It's like adding an extra room onto your house. So it does cause neurons to grow, BDNF. So once again, exercising brings down isolation. Then it elevates my mood. And that's likely to change my story of being this poor Irish immigrant far away from the motherland to, oh my gosh, isn't upstate New York beautiful, And I love walking. So it moves me into a more blessed rather than stressed mindset. Okay. And I'm very conscious that it's near lunch and I don't want you to get upset without food. Lack of food also triggers parasympathetic activity. Okay, we're at our last slide here. Grateful and mindful living. What part of the brain lights up when I'm grateful? Orbital frontal cortex over left and right. Acts of sharing and acts of service. We already know this, but when we are involved in acts of kindness, our dopamine goes up, our serotonin goes up. When we are giving stuff away, we suddenly start feeling very, very, very safe. So sometimes if people are lonely and they just start decluttering and thinking, who can I share this with? Automatically, if I can give something away, the brain says, okay, if Paul can give away his tie, he owns the tie. If I can't give the tie away, I become anxious and then the tie owns me. Does that make sense? There's a strong correlation between loneliness and hoarding as well. But that's a whole other way that's a whole other discussion. So many times, a great way to reduce loneliness is just to start decluttering and thinking, who could use the tie? When I'm giving stuff away, frontal cortex lights up. When I can't give it away, the amygdala lights up and in comes the epinephrine, norepinephrine, and cortisol. Practicing empathy, compassion, we've looked at that. Meditation improves our cognitive function. That's why chanting in all traditions calms us, soothes us, and connects us. One thing here at the end, micro movements. In the old days, doctors used to prescribe knitting to anxious people. When we're involved in an activity together that involves micro movements, such as knitting or sewing or quilting or woodworking, we start relaxing and we start feeling connected. The brain follows the movement. So right now, what are you looking at? What are you focusing on as I speak right now? Exactly. So the brain, the eye follows movement. So no matter what my mood is, the brain goes to movement. So knitting and sewing and crocheting is absolutely wonderful. I'm working with another young man, and he's in college up north, a different person. He has started crocheting. And in his dorm, he's out of school now, but in his dorm last year, he started crocheting. Then a group of other guys started crocheting, and they're crocheting like Disney figures, action heroes, not rugs and things like, their grandmothers might, but, just sort of little figures and toys. So 3 or 4 of them, guys would get together and just crochet, and then the conversations would happen. So they set a goal for Christmas to crochet little things for family. And then for the end of the year to just grow, so micro movements, once again. It's like the thing with beads, all of the faith traditions have beads. The micro movement of the bead from one to the other is a great way to slow down the brain and to bring about a community activity as well. All right. Well, folks, we'll bring our time to a close for today as we get ready to get you for lunch. Any questions before we break at 12? Any last questions?
Sounds like you miss Ireland.
So, and I like cheesecake. I miss Ireland, but I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy to be here. I will be going on the 7th of August. I'll go for 10 days. But absolutely, when I came here first, absolutely. I came here, I spoke English, so there was an expectation that I would just blend in. But I come from a very different world. So what do? Do I sort of just gather with an Irish underground community, or do I blend in? And many times we have to fight that desire to stay with our own and blend in, acculturate in. So, so that's what we do. Yeah, but absolutely. Takes a couple of years even to get into a new way of doing things, a new way of connecting. But as always, you have to bloom where you're planted. You have to bloom where you're planted. Great. Anything else?
Yeah, I have a question on the Zoom.
Okay, yes.
I can't see you because of the PowerPoint is blocking the view, but I just wonder if you have any books with this information in it that you can share, or do you have your own book with all of this inside this, what you presented?
A great question. I did put up a bibliography there with some of the information I use. If you wanted, I could put a bibliography together as well. There isn't, with this, I am sort of pulling from a lot of sources.
Yeah.
So, but I did have a couple of books there that I would recommend. You see on the bottom of page 3, there's a little.
Is that on the PowerPoint or a handout?
That's on the handout, yes.
Okay, yeah, okay.
Yeah. I couldn't write to save my life. I'm not that bright, so I have never written anything.
Oh, no, you must do that.
I can speak, but I can't write,
You
But,
get a ghostwriter,
there you go.
ghostwriter.
So I wouldn't say this is a particular source, but I would be pulling just from a lot of, different authors in sharing what I have shared today.
Okay, thank you.
Mike was just talking about the parasympathetic nervous system. Many times it doesn't calm down for many, many, many people for many reasons. Generally speaking, if we get upset, it can take us up to 4 hours, as we said, for the epinephrine, norepinephrine, and cortisol to be metabolized outside of the body. So it can take up to 4 hours, even though some people might be fine in 20 minutes or 30 minutes. But if it's constant, the body doesn't get a chance to affect. So if someone is constantly in a threatening environment, it could be physically threatening, emotionally threatening, they never really get a chance to get into that reflective part. And that's why we see people make very poor choices when they're constantly inflamed. The brain, they're in this, we say back here, I react, here I reflect. So they don't get into that sympathetic nervous, the parasympathetic system doesn't kick in. But what does kick that in are tools, techniques that we've looked at. Walking, all of the good stuff we know, deep breathing, exercising, all of those good things. The tools that we have mentioned today and on those guidelines, they trigger the parasympathetic nervous system. So it will happen naturally, but it happens faster if I go out for a walk, change my attitude, take a shower, leave a bad scene, all of that stuff. So I can actually speed it up. So absolutely. But to your point, Mike, absolutely. Many times people can't kick that in because they're living in they're too stressed. And then we wonder, why do some people make bad choices, as opposed to what sort of environment are they in that they don't have the ability to reflect. The cultural shock. Yeah, and it depends, you know, how long it comes up with the enculturation many times with us immigrants. How long do we keep the identity of an immigrant, or how long do we move into the dominant culture of the country we go to? So there is a direct correlation between the choices that I will make and how I see myself. You know, do I over connect with my immigrant community, or do I try and blend into the dominant community of the country that I have adopted to live in? So it's sort of up to, in many ways, it's absolutely individual. Do I blend in, or do I choose just to stay in my group? Absolutely. And once again, if people are grieving, you know, if someone's granny just died, we don't say, oh, she's in heaven, you're good. Of course, you know, we're not saying that. We walk with them. We look at what their resources are, you know, we journey with someone, you know, the positive isn't a sort of a Pollyannish view of life, but it's looking at the competencies the person has. So you want to find out, what are they good at? What gives them life? What tools do they already have in the tool bag? So you're joining with them in that, seeing, okay, what's working well? What is your mindset? What's in your faith tradition? What works well? So, and that's a fantastic question. You don't suddenly go in as a cheerleader and, you know, but you start with where they're at. You're the guide on the side. But you always want to know that people are going through a phase. They might feel terrible, but they do have skills. And many times you're dusting down the tools that are in the tool bag. You're not giving them a hand out, you're giving them a hand up. You know, you're not helping them, you're empowering them. So you're not helping them with a pep talk, you're empowering them with what they have already. And that's going to be as individual as the person is. Well done. Absolutely. It's moving us from this brain to this brain, that I'm reacting to I'm reflecting. Absolutely. And as you know yourselves, it's going to be as individual as what the person is, but you always want to find out what tools are in their tool bag. That's why I said, even with that handout, I would say to them, what are you doing already? You know, of the 50, what do you do first? And then what would you like to include? So you're like a buffet. You offer them, you see what they like, and then you give them more of what is easy and manageable. Remember, it's empowering, it's not helping. You,
So the difference between being responsible to responsible. I
absolutely,
think you have the answer, resources.
exactly,
And it's like this together. It's not, oh my gosh, I give you all of these tools. and all of these
exactly.
resources.
Exactly. There's the Paulo Freire model of education. And in that, Paulo Freire suggests that everybody has the answers already. And what we do is we find the answer. So it's respecting the dignity of looking at if they're coming and talking to you, they already have recognized something. So already in ministry, they're already saying, help me with something. And so many times they may just want something that's fresh and new, but you want to empower them, because only that way is it sustainable. If they, you know, you want to see, you know, what are you doing well? And if you're walking, well, maybe let's increase it, you know, or you find out what is good. We empower, we don't help. We give, you know, it's not a handout, it's a hand up. Wonderful.
We can do that
So we want
right
to
on this.
pull all of you back together. for
Yeah.
the last part of the
We
morning.
missed it, yeah.
Sorry about some of our technical things. We had other things in plan, but it didn't work. But so thank you for all of your patience on screen and for most of you staying with us. I want to show you a picture in light of our topic today, and I showed it on screen a few seconds ago.
Uh-huh.
So the other day, someone sent me this picture as I was pulling together some of the last details of this. And then they sent this story. I had spent an hour in the bank with my dad as he had to transfer some money. I couldn't resist myself and I asked, Dad, why don't we activate your internet banking? And he said, why would I do that? Well, then you won't have to spend an hour here for things like transfer. You can even do your shopping online. Everything would be so much easier. I was so excited about introducing him to the world of online banking. He asked, well, if I do that, I won't have to step out of the house. I said, yes, yes. I told him how even groceries can be delivered to the house door and how Amazon delivers everything. His answer left me tongue-tied. Dad said, since I entered this bank today, I have met 4 of my friends. I have chatted a while with the staff who know me very well by now. You know I am alone. This is the company that I need. I like to get ready and come to this bank. I have enough time. It is the physical touch that I crave. 2 years back, I got sick. The store owner whom I buy fruits from came to see me, sat at my bedside, and cried with me. When your mom fell down a few days back while on her morning walk, our local grocer, who knew her well, immediately got into his car to rush to her home as he knows where I live. Would I have that human touch if everything comes to me online? Why would I want everything delivered to me and force me to interact with just my computer? I like to know the person that I'm dealing with and not just the seller. It creates bonds of relationships. Does Amazon deliver all this as well? Technology isn't life. Spend time with people, not with devices. So we'll also send that to you at home. But I'm glad that I opened that on my computer a few days ago. So with that in mind, we have an amazing group of people. Some of you might have worked with Capacitar before. I know our folks here have, and we have a couple. There is a handout that you received today, and if you did not online, we will send it to you. It's an amazing international group of people that, and I'm going to let them talk about and make us do a few physical things that we can practice for our self-care, but also with our patients and colleagues. So I'm going to turn it over to our beloved friends and let them introduce themselves. And this will lead us to our closing, which leads us to our lunch.
Hi. Hello there, everybody. I'm Mary Lou Coughlin. And I'm short Betsy Lindsay. It's just totally been such an amazing morning of his presentation and what he explained. But what's such a synchronicity or wonderful thing is that we were invited capacitar, and the word that he left us with, your question was, we empower. We don't fix. And what is the word capacitar? It's to empower. And the word was given to these practices by women in Nicaragua back in the 1984, when Pat Kane, the founder that went on to found this organization, was invited to go to Nicaragua with a missionary sister to help with a festival or a prayer service for disappeared ones of mothers and families. And Pat, as a young student woman, went to help as an artist. And the woman noticed as she was there that even though the violence was happening at night and it was not a safe place, that Pat didn't seem to be disturbed, that she seemed unusually calm and just remained at peace. And they inquired, how do you do this? How do you do that? And she said, well, I have some practices. And so they said, what are they? What do you do? And she said, well, it's breathing, it's visualization, meditation, and I do something called Tai Chi Chi, which is a movement. And they asked her to show them to them. And after they learned them and did them and had that feeling of calm and peace, they gave it the name capacitar. They said they felt empowered now to do something for themselves. And so Pat came back to the United States, finished her schoolwork, her master's in education and PhD in the what constitutes the manual. And when you asked for the did he have a book? His book will be invaluable. We need to get somebody that will listen and help him put that together. But in many ways, the manual, this is the first one, and it went for 25 years, and then it's been updated, and now it's been updated once more, but it's essentially the same material, but just as more is being uncovered. In this one, it's called Awakening a New Heart with Mind, Body, Spirit Practices. And so these, few of these is what Betsy and I hope we can share with you today. Betsy.
Whenever I'm invited to come to a group to speak, and I just have to honor Father Chris for asking us, and some of you are familiar faces, I just want to start by saying what I say in my heart, which is, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable to you. Amen.
Ditto. What I found myself doing as she said that prayer is I simply put my hand over my heart, which is always a good thing to do. That could be a start to this. I think what I'm inclined to do is to go off my course of what I was going to do, but start with this. How it is that I'm here is in 1984, I went to a hospice training, and a nurse came one night as one of the educators, and her theme was touch and the need we have for touch. And so I noticed this morning when we went around the very first questions, I heard Betsy say, touch would be what she missed. That was her first word. And in my yellow sheet, I said I would miss, first of all, walking in nature, but second was hugging. So back to that theme of touch and hug, this night of the hospice training, the nurse that was giving it, she said that was her topic, and it was going to be experiential. And she was going to be asking for volunteers. And then she kind of gave, and then all of a sudden she suddenly says, okay, so I'm ready for my first experience here now. I need a volunteer. And there were like this many people and nobody raised their hand. And I was like sitting over here. And she said, well, it looks like you're my volunteer, which it may be now. And what she wanted was, oh, this is great, Chris. She wanted a volunteer to show us hugs and what a lot of people call a hug and the various kinds of hugs we have in America, the burping one and the kind of hip to hip and almost anything that avoids touching but can still constitutes a hug. And then she said, but the one I want to show is the one that I guarantee if you can get 3 of these today, you will have a sense of well-being. If you can get 12 a day, you will be high level well-being. So are you ready?
She needs to get near the microphone so we can hear on Zoom. Yeah.
Okay, it's toe to toe, toe to toe, knee to knee, belly to belly, and then hug.
The brain, the tingly, the good, yeah.
Say that in microphone.
You can feel the brain chemistry, the tingly, good hormones being released.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
We should be hugging chaplains on our units. To the nurses.
Okay. Okay. Yes. So here's the thing. What Vanessa just shared with me, she said we should have hugging chaplains in every team. Okay. Really, what a wonderful way to begin. This wasn't our original plan. Okay, let's go now here, moving forward. Onward, the next. All right. Hands, a show of hands. Okay, and then to realize that our hands are on the 14th day about in embryogenesis understanding is the first cell. We can put our hands out just for a minute here. The first forming of a cell is the heart. 14 days. And from the heart, the first movement of cells beyond the heart starts to come out the shoulder and coming out to the arms and out to hands. And also then the beginning of the spinal cord up to the brain and down to the sacrum, the whole spinal cord here, spinal spine. And the work that Paul this morning spoke about the brain was just so embodying, wasn't it? He just, and the very last of nature, that when we talk about our bodies, we're talking cellularly, just what it was a 127th that the nervous system sends the message to the brain. But the nervous system is throughout our entire skin area. So that's the importance of touch. And why when you get a full body hug, everything goes happy. So our first thing that we'd like to teach today, and Betsy will do this with you or share it with you, it's called the finger holes. So our hands are connected with our hearts right away. Betsy.
I actually want to provide a little more of an introduction because this is sacred space and you are sacred people. I believe to get my orientation, life is a healing journey for us. For those, you have chosen a career, a profession to journey alongside. And I know in terms of the compassion fatigue that can come, and I learned from you all 2 years ago was when we were first invited to come. That was 2022. We weren't quite through COVID yet. And I realized everybody at the endowment that day, you had been left behind. We were not doing healing for the healers. And it touched me deeply. I didn't really appreciate why we were there. So I just want to let you know that experience has been in my heart, my mind, my body. And I take you with me wherever I go. And where I go, I retired 2 years ago, but I'm living my new purpose. But I take you to the women's detention facility where I'm a chaplain for the police personnel there. I just most recently went to Harbor UCLA with these practices, and there was doctors and nurses and staff who just, they took a pause for an hour and got the practices. And then tonight is, and that's where I met Father Chris. After I got capacitor trained in 2015, I was called to be at Juvenile Hall, which is just down the block here. And so now I'm going up to Somar, and that's where the young men and are serving their juvenile life sentences. So just know that your experience, and I talk about you, how you were forgotten, and it just keeps reminding me, you're all first responders, even though people don't necessarily see you that way. But doctors and nurses, and then your story shared 2 years ago had a profound impact on me. So I namaste to you all. So finger holds, this is what we call as our kind of our go-to practice. And it's very, we'll be giving you a card you'll take away at the end. But what we do know is that we're all spirit, we're all energy. What we also know based on the brilliance of Paul today and the brilliance you bring to your work is that there's trauma. And when that energy and emotions that impact us after a traumatic event occur, we're out of balance. And so that's what the finger holds are, is just to have a way, personal practice for yourself. It may be a patient with permission to touch, or it may be if you're working in a hospice situation with a family member to help them touch the person that they're loving and saying goodbye to. So it has itself, but it's always about others as well. So it's an indigenous practice from Indonesia in terms of the finger holds. That's where Pat Kane, as she journeyed the world and researched, found it. And we know that the emotions are natural, but we have to bring them back into balance. So it doesn't, I love the finger holds because like it says, it doesn't change our reality of what's going on in our world. And we certainly know that that's all happening in your world of work, your personal lives and beyond, but it changes our ability to just be grounded and be able to just see it for what it is, but it doesn't take anything away from our spirit and our energy. So I'll start out with just an explanation of the 5 fingers. The thumb, and then we're going to actually do the practice, is your sadness, grief, and tears. The index finger is panic and fear. And oftentimes Pat will like point the finger when you can even think of in a situation where somebody was pointing a finger at you and the panic that you felt. The third finger, the middle finger, not surprising, is anger, rage, and resentment across cultures, sometimes too. The ring finger, which we sometimes will twist a ring, is our worry and anxiety. And then the little finger is lack of self-esteem, not feeling empowered. So the practice is that we will hold and either lower your gaze or close your eyes. What we'll do is just hold very gently, lovingly, as we'll go through each of the 5. We will not spend the time that's probably needed. They say children do it. They get this release, this drain of all the negative in about 1 to 2 minutes. We as adults need a little bit longer time, but at least you'll have some of the experience as we go through it. So we'll definitely be breathing, lowering your gaze or closing your eyes, and I will just guide you in terms of your inhale and your exhale. And then you may bring in some of your own energy, but it's always about letting go, whatever that emotion is within that finger and the thumb. So with that, I'm going to ask you to just sit comfortably in your chair, just relax. Close your eyes or lower your gaze, whichever you're comfortable. And then just gently hold your thumb. You may feel a pulse as you go through the finger holds, and that means that emotion is a little more active, a little stronger, or you may just be in a state where, you know, you just know that that energy is there and it's in a balanced state. So I ask you to take a deep breath and let go of any sadness, grief, tears that you're experiencing. And then on your inhale, I ask you to bring in peace and comfort. So take a deep breath, exhale, sadness, grief, and tears. Inhale, peace and comfort. And then take a few more breaths on your own at your own pace. Okay, gently release. Grip and then touch now your index finger. Take a deep breath, and as you breathe out any fear, any panic. And then breathe in your strength, the inner power, and your courage. So again, take a deep breath and let go of any fear, any panic. And as you inhale, inhale the power of your being, that strength that you possess, and your courage. And then again, a few more breaths at your own pace, in your own way. Okay, gently release. And then take your middle finger. Again, we'll take a deep breath and release any anger, resentment, rage. Inhale the compassion and the passion that you live your life. Let nothing, no one take that away from you. Again, inhale deeply and let go of any anger, rage, or resentment. And on your inhale, breathe in the compassion, passion for your life, the being of who you are. Okay, release. Take a soft hold on your ring finger. Breathe in deeply and let go of any worry, any anxiety, any thoughts that are taking you away from being very present in this sacred space at this sacred time. This is your time. This is your pause. So again, breathe in and breathe out any anxiety and worry. Inhale, just your peace. Inhale, serenity. Know that you're being held, that you're being comforted, and that all is well. One more, taking in the breath and letting go of the anxiety and worry, and inhaling the peace, serenity, knowing that you're held and comforted and that all is well. A few more breaths on your own. And finally, release. And then take hold of your small finger, the little finger. Inhale and let go of any feelings of being powerless, a victim, lack of self-esteem. And breathe in that power that the higher power has given you to do the work that you do. Breathe in the feelings of being victorious, no matter what you're faced with. And breathe in the knowing that you were made and are already perfect, whole, and complete. So one more deep breath, take it in, let go of any feelings of powerlessness, being a victim, low self-esteem, and breathe in all that you are, which is whole, perfect, and complete. Okay. Let go of your finger. You can just put your hands in your lap, raise your gaze, open your eyes. Namaste. Briefly feel the space, feel the silence of the space here now. That we've done this together as a community, have created a field of healing space. And the power of the finger holes, and you don't need to do all 5 of them. It's wonderful to be able to do that at nighttime, maybe before you fall to sleep, or at any time to do all the one hand, the other hand, thumb to thumb, or just the thumb. When you spoke of grief, that we have so much unattended sorrow in our hearts over our lives, that you can hold your thumb at any time and just do that briefly. And you feel a pulse, didn't you, as you held it? The more you do this, and you don't do it tight, it's very loose, that you will feel, you'll know when you've balanced that emotion. And that's what Pat and Kwasitar understand, the finger holes. They help us manage our emotions. They're with us. And so they don't get stuck in from all that brain that's doing to hold and keep up here. Here, the touch of ourselves and touch to someone else releases that brain. The body, the nervous system, the vagus nerve just kicks in here with balance, a sense of peace. And I don't know how much more time we have. Is it maybe 0? Okay. Well, fudge. One more thing. Let's see. Should I do the shower of light? Okay. Okay. We'll end with the shower of light. And I guess more than that, there'll be some handouts. I have a handout. Somebody asked about suggested readings, and I had put something together and a capacitor explanation. And the mudras that you have on your handout, I don't know how we're going to do that. Sometime we'll have to have a circle here at St. Camillus and continue to do these practices. And now that you kind of know what they are, you'll be wanting to come. Okay, so what we're going to close again is we're going to do one Tai Chi movement that's a favorite. It's called the shower of light. So
the shower of light, it works best if you can do it sitting, but it works best if you stand and give yourself a little space. Come out here, those of you. So actually, in a way, this shower of light this morning is just all that we took in this morning from the talk and from Betsy and from Father Chris. But mostly the shower of light is to raise our arms up to the heavens, to the sun, to the sky, to the infinite universe, to love itself, the mystery of love. And we simply bring our arms down, we wash ourselves with that light, grace, and we bring it all the way down to the earth because it's clearing our field of anything that's negative, anything that has got us disturbed that we just worked with, the hands where we let go. We're gonna, let me come, whoops, let's stay here. We're gonna bring our hands up and just kind of come forward with it as a rocking motion. So and then come down. The shower, and it's coming, washing, clean, light for ourselves, for all that keeps our hearts from being fully engaged in loving. The shower of light brings us infinite love, infinite light, infinite hope. One more time, and bring our feet together and our hands back to right here below the belly button, in the belly here. And it's hand over hand back to center. We've just done something for ourselves. The left hand, AC. Coming into our center, we're going to go to the right side, and this is for the world, for our community, for your people that you visit, for peace in this world of ours. The same infinite light, the same infinite love, the same infinite source of just what we need is something that we can bring to ourselves and to others with our showering of light. One more time, and back to center. Namaste.